Hey there guys, this is Obsidian Chill. Got another video for you today. And I know it's been a little bit of time since we had Survival Mode Season 2. I think it's a good time because it's not as much fresh in people's minds, so it's a good time to kind of sit back and kind of do an overview of it, kind of do a review of it, as well as what's kind of on the horizon for SM in terms of Season 3, in terms of what we can expect going forward, or what we should be able to expect going forward. So we can kind of touch on... so if you went around for Season 1, there was a lot of... I wouldn't say a lot, but there was a few bugs that were kind of pretty much breaking for SM. The whole lunch spam aspect of it just completely trivialized SM completely. It's to the point where the rewards, you didn't even feel good about completing it. Yeah, you got the crown in the mail, but it's I don't even see people really wear the crown. There's enough people that were still around for it that got the crown, because there's still hundreds and hundreds of leagues that completed it because you could just lunch spam, and it really took no skill to beat Ultraman on that round 30. It was just round 30 was simple. If you could get to it, you could pretty much completed it. So at that point, there's a lot of controversy. I covered it in some videos, and it just turned into SM ended in a giant mess. Milbarge, who created SM, or didn't say created SM, but created that SM. He was in charge of it. He was, pissed off at how it turned out in terms of lunch spamming and not being able to really do anything about it. And the whole, even the beginning of SM when it came out, where you could have there's some kind of bug where you could have larger groups than 4. So you had 6-7 people doing a 4-man SM, and he had to individually go in and kick the groups, and it was just a disaster. So at that point, I didn't even know if SM was going to come back. I certainly didn't want it to come back unless it was going to be fixed. And the lunging aspect, the damage mitigation that you got from a lunge, that would change directly after SM due to it being an SM. Which, you're not going to really see that in any sort of raid. That type of damage mitigation from a lunge, you're only going to notice in SM, because there's nothing, even in Elite, there's nothing that's going to that you can dodge that's not going to kill you. So if Elite has a scripted one shot, or if it's some attack that's going to kill you, it's going to kill you. Where in SM you can avoid it, because usually it's a weapon attack or some kind of slow ranged attack, so you have time to dodge it, but you would never notice that immunity basically. So when that taken away, no one really knew how that lunge immunity was going to impact anything until SM came back, because there wasn't really any examples that we could have to test it. So then it kind of leaked that SM was coming back, and at this point, even I wasn't sure what it was going to look like. So I got a sense from how they were, I wouldn't say rushing it, but how they were coming out with SM so quickly. I knew it was going to be basically Season 1.5, and at that point I wasn't too upset about it, because if you had Season 1 without the lunge spamming, then you'd be able to see who actually could complete it and do it properly. And at this point, I wasn't accounting for all the speed hackers. I know there were plenty of speed hackers the first SM, but I think the threat that Mep said they were gonna check logs, minimized it. And then for Season 2, he even released. He said that there'd be bans and other things about that. But I don't think any of that came to fruition. I don't know a single group or player that got banned for speed hacking. So I think that was just a smoke screen, which was definitely annoying, to say that a nice term, because Season 2 definitely had the most speed hacking that I've ever seen in content. You would there would be cosplayers that were their names would be XX Zeus XX, and they'd have the crown and the lightning bolt back. So it's yeah, okay. You had players that were 310 CR, 80 skill points, they'd have the crown and back. So it's yeah, okay. And I know it was really rampant on the EU. You had players advertising it in chat, and they didn't even get banned. It was just I don't know. So that's sorry. That's kind of jumping ahead a little bit to how Season 2 turned out, but that's that aspect covered. But yeah, when it came out, now the boss order did change. So basically, we had Baron Savage was a carryover, Minotaur was a carryover, Manto was a carryover, Johnny Quick was a carryover. Freeze was different at round 5. King Shark was a carryover. Deathstroke, Lex, Soldier, and then Zeus was changed at round 10. So we had 2 new bosses, and other than that, was just basically changing the boss order. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, because when you have bosses at different stages, it changes their difficulty. Like if you look at King Shark on the first year, what was King Shark? I think round 12, I believe, 12 or 13. But now that you had King Shark at 26, that's a lot different. So King Shark was kind of like that first phase, that first round where players and groups really struggled with because of his block breakers. And that kind of led into the first kind of bug with SM. I wouldn't even call it a bug. It was just how people weren't sure how the mechanics actually worked. So we'll kind of touch on that here. So the overall issue with season 2 was the gray range tanking. So season 1 was the lunge spam, and season 2 was gray range tanking. So what I mean by gray range tanking is basically you're always staying at the gray reticule from the enemy boss, so that if you're in gray range, he's really not going to hit you with anything. And that's why some attacks like snowball, or like projectile attacks like snowball, fireball, those attacks can hit in gray range, and they'll still apply aggro. So the reason why you want to do that is that if you stay in gray range too long, the boss will reset because he has no target. So there's plenty of examples out of King Shark where basically you would stand around, the tank would be staying in gray range so he didn't die from the block breakers or his the brawling taps, and then he was staying it too long. King Shark would stand still and basically reset his health. I saw plenty of examples of that. Some people want to argue that even though they did it correctly, he still reset, and then I think twice DC came out with hot fixes saying that King Shark would be less likely to reset, and he would still reset. So, I mean, that's I guess that's kind of the semi-controversy around it. There's barely any video examples that I saw where he wasn't, and there were so many groups like all the groups that I were in that I had tanks. I didn't see him reset at all. I mean, there was even like a live stream where Dane, an EU player, his group was doing it, and I mean, Dane knows what he's doing his tanking. He called it out. He said you're staying gray range too long, and then all of a sudden resets. So I mean, if you're a knowledgeable tank, you know what's going to happen, and you know that you have to stay in range, and then you know the consequences of it. So that's where kind of like the pugs died out of King Shark. So good group could still get past King Shark. That was an issue for them because if you had a knowledgeable tank, you were completely fine. But I think King Shark was basically the pug killer round. And the Mr. Freeze, this one I didn't. So Mr. Freeze is round 5. Really, it was more like environmental damage. You had like the snow rainfall. You had his snowballs attacks. Like Mr. Freeze himself didn't really hurt that much. He's a rifle, so it's really easy to counter rifle. Basically, you're just walking in, or same thing. You're gray range tanking or you're lunging him. Like rifle attacks are really telegraphed. As long as you don't get too close to him when he does like the was it rolling barrage? That attacks can pretty much kill you. Same thing with like Deathstroke. That rifle attack is pretty much the killer. That rolling barrage one is just that burst damage. And that we go on. Yeah. So sorry, the bug with Mr. Freeze. So this one I didn't even see. So I was told that I didn't see examples of it, but I were told by players that I do trust that it did happen. So I guess it was more so people were spamming around like 15, 25 to get the orbital strike for Mr. Freeze, the freeze orbital. So what would happen would be if you wiped on Mr. Freeze and re-queued it, he would be his damage would increase. Like the difficulty would increase in the round. Similar to like if you remember Throwing the Dead, if you wiped on Throwing the Dead Elite, the bot Hades got stronger by 1 CR. But I mean, Mr. Freeze didn't increase in CR; it just increased in damage. So that was a bug that also came about. So at that point, then we had Deathstroke, same thing. So Lex Luthor used to be around 1, so piss easy basically. Now, since Lex Luthor was 28, you have another issue with gray range tanking because Lex Luthor is very, very quick. He follows you around the map, so if you have to completely stay on top of it, or have someone else lunge his counters and stuff like that. But Lex Luthor is really good, a good example of an SM boss, and you have to be really on your toes. Ultimate Soldier is another one. He's the exact same carbon copy as the previous year. Ultimate Soldier is pretty much one of the perfect exemplars out of all SMs as a boss. And then around 10, we got to Zeus. Now, Zeus changed a lot from how it was first implemented in SM. So when you think of it, all they did was take a carbon copy from Fractured Gods 3 Elite Zeus. So that means you had like the bomb phase. That means you had like the lightning bolt. That means you had his like lunge phase that did like the massive damage. So think of like that Fractured God Sphere fight for 8 players into a Zeus fight, and you still had the statues. So that was just like overwhelming. Like you can't have a tank be like the bomb phase that has to block through it, and then Zeus is going to block break the tank, and the tank will die. Like you can't have that. You can't have like a lightning bolt phase. That just doesn't work. You already had the Source Storms. So the Zeus wasn't too bad. The only thing is Zeus and Fractured God Sphere wasn't counterable. The same thing was like Darkseid. You can't counter Zeus, can't counter Darkseid. So they changed it so you could counter Zeus. Which made it a little bit simpler because it's basically two-handed. So if you had like a second, like the healer or controller in the group lunge Zeus, then made it much easier. Or what resulted to is gray range tanking, basically walking out of range, throwing snowball or fireball just to something to keep aggro up, and then basically staying out of range on his counters, or being able to go for the slower counters, because it's basically Zeus's weapon tap damage at round 30 is what killed a lot of players, and it was hard to account for when that weapon tap damage would happen. It was a bit more random. But the bug on Zeus was the Zeus statues. The Zeus statues, a lot of it I think had to do with the lasso artifact, or using lasso as a power. So if the statue spawned and if you used a lasso right away, it just bugged them out so they didn't do any damage. Sometimes they would attack you, but they wouldn't do their special debuffs on them, which made it more of an issue with the tank debuff, because that's usually the killer one that would debuff the tank, but that was trivialized because of that bug. So that was unfortunate as well. So all those are minor bugs, gray range tanking, stuff like that. That's more like play style. So a lot of people contributed this to the fact that Survival Mode Season 2 wasn't on test server. That was another large controversy with it. But when you think about it, the only thing that changed was the boss order and then Mr. Freeze and Zeus. So when players are complaining about Survival Mode Season 2 not being on test server, those bugs that happened wouldn't have been found on test server. Like when you think of like the test server gear, like you're playing in regular gear, artifacts, lower skill points, stuff like that. You don't have elite gear. You've got delay, especially for EU players testing it, because they're the test servers in Las Vegas, so they're pinging like 120, 200 ping to that server. Realistically, you're not getting past. I think the farthest round on test server, even for season 1, was like maybe 22, 23, I think, and that was a group I was in with Platts. We did like 20, 21, 22. I mean, there could be farther groups, but I mean, no one's spending hours getting to round 30 or 28 or 29 on test server. Like, why would you waste the time doing that? You're doing the lower rounds, like you're doing 1 through 9, you're doing like 11 through 20. Those are the rounds that you're doing, and you're not going to notice those bugs there because they're straightforward. There's not really enough damage to kill you unless you purposely screw up. So. The same thing with that Mr. Freeze bug. Who's going to farm round 15 or 25 on test server? No one. No one's going to do that. So you would never run into that situation where you would find that bug about Mr. Freeze getting stronger when you wiped, because you're only doing the round once or twice to make sure that it functions correctly, and there's nothing like obvious bugs. So even if there was a test server, a public test server, no one would have discovered that bug. Same thing with the Zeus statues. So the Zeus statues, no one's going to discover that in round 30. Because no one's doing round 30 on test. So, and same thing with the gray range tanking. No one's doing 26 King Shark or 28 Luthor or 30 Zeus on test server. That's not happening. No one is doing higher rounds like that on test server. They're just doing the low rounds. They're doing like a quick, 1 through, like I said, 1 through 10 or maybe 10 through 20, just to kind of get used to the bosses and the fights and stuff like that. But no one is doing those high rounds on tests because A, it's not worth it. B, they don't have the gear to properly do it. And C, they might not have like the proper connection to do it. Or the fact that you don't have a PS test server, they're missing players to do it. You're not going to just pug high rounds on test server and say, hey, would you want to do test? Do you want to do high rounds SM on test server? You're not just going to find a random group to do that properly. So even those bugs and even the SM not being on test server it didn't impact anything at all. That's just a mute point to argue over because it didn't have any impact on anything at all. So going forward with SM, what to expect? So right now there's a few things. So SM came out in, was it 2014? Yeah, 2014 was O and Trigon. 2015 was the first year for FOSS SM. And then we had like FOSS, Trigon, O, and HH. And then I think 2017 was the last. I think it ended in FOSS 2017. We didn't have a HH in 2017. So for all those years of SM, you had 8-man. You had ad waves that were quite difficult, and usually sometimes groups would wipe on ad waves rather than the bosses. And then you had bosses that worked well in combos that presented different opposing difficulties and mechanics. And then you had different scaling in terms of just 1 through 20. So all those SMs from 2014 to 2017, there's only 3 leagues that ever completed an SM. And there's only 1 league that ever completed an SM during CR scaling. And then when you take Season 1 and Season 2, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of leagues and players completed SM. So, I mean, what's going on? So, and that's not even about like an ego thing. That's just like, why would you have the most difficult content that's designed? So, like, the developers designed this content to be the most difficult content to appease all the elitists or whatever, elite players, or, you know, to give people that hardest challenge. And then make it to where it's just basically piss easy. A lot of that has to do with it being a 4-man, and I realize being a 4-man is marketable to more players. More players can queue up and do a 4-man. It's more replayability. That's why you have the same rounds, like 1 through 10, 10 through 20, 20 through 30. It's all the same bosses. Everything's the exact same, just different difficulty levels. So I understand that from like a marketability or like a revenue standpoint. The more people are playing it, you can have more rewards. You put the currency on the marketplace so people can buy the rewards again. So I understand that your concept is you have to justify SM and the time investment to create it to have some kind of revenue payoff. But you're sacrificing the very notion of SM and what it stands for to have that marketability or to have that potential profits from it. And that's what I don't feel is right. So I don't feel like SM should have gone to a 4-man at all. You can't have an SM with 4-man. You can't have hard ad waves. You can't have 2 bosses if it's only 4 players. And what that does is a 4-man SM is extremely limiting. You have to have 2 tanks. So that's half your roll is 2 tanks. And you have to have a healer. And then basically a troll becomes useless. So you have like a DPS up until around 20, 25, and then maybe like a buff troll or battle troll from like 25 to 30. So and you can't deviate from that. And with it being a 4-man, you're basically really restricted to the rolls, especially for the tanks. Like you can't get away with atomic tanking. You can't get away with even earth tanking is difficult. You can't get away with using electricity or Sork healer, stuff like that. It's very limiting in terms of what kind of healers you can have because a 4-man plays so much into like a water healer strength and having shields. It's better to have shields to mitigate the damage rather than having like burst healers. Like a nature healer in SM is at a massive disadvantage compared to everything else because it's got no shields and just has burst healing. Well, that's not, if you're getting hit for like 99% of your health in one hit, a nature healer is not going to do any good. It's going to take you like 4 or 5 seconds to recover that health, and you're going to be dead by the next hit. Rather, like a water healer can constantly have like Tempest Guard or Bubble on you rotating damage because it's a 4-man shield. So you got all 4 bubbles, you got Tempest Guard, you got High Tide to reset it, you got the Flood of Power to reset it. So it's just, or you have sorcery, spamming Arbiter in the background. It's just massive differences. He's going to drop soon. The other thing you have to take in fact into is artifacts. So there's 2 artifacts, Page of Destiny and Purple Healing Ray, that weren't around for Season 1 and that were around for Season 2. So you have like 2 massively, I wouldn't say, massively is not the right word. So you have like 2 incredibly strong and beneficial healing artifacts for Season 2 that you don't have for Season 1. So you have to almost have SM account for artifacts because players are going to have artifacts. So that's something you can do in 8-man because 8-man you can have different group setups. You can have 2 different boss combinations. And speaking of boss combinations, like Baron Savage is a pointless SM boss. Minotaur is a pointless SM boss. He just roams around. Black Manta is pointless. I mean, Johnny Quick is annoying, but really, with his teleport and his encircling whatever Cyclone Push nerfed, I mean, he's pointless. Mr. Freeze is pointless. King Shark is a good example. I'd keep King Shark. Deathstroke is kind of pointless, but I could see keeping him. Lex Luthor was a previous SM boss, but I mean, Lex Luthor is only good with comboed with Superman. Ultimate Soldier is a perfect one. Zeus is a bad example. So there's some bosses you can keep, but a lot of these, like 3/4 of the bosses for SM for season 1 and 2, you have to scrap because they suck. Like they're not, don't, if something's not broken, don't fix it. Just literally grab the SM bosses we've had or ads we've had from previous SMs and create that. All these players weren't around for Foss, Trigon, Oa, and HH. Like if you grab like the black and pink lanterns from Oa, those are wreck players. Like the black and pink lanterns from Oa are stronger than some of the SM bosses we just had here. Same thing with like, you have bosses like you have Deathstroke. Compare him to like General Fabricant from Oa. Night and day difference. Fabricant would wipe the entire group, where Deathstroke really doesn't have the ability to do that unless you like spam him with supply drops. There's so many good SM bosses you can pick from past years that players wouldn't know about, and just combine it. So I understand that SMs have to have themes or whatever, but I mean the theme of SM should be difficulty, not like a theme of like whatever Zeus. Like the theme this year was Zeus. That's why all the rewards were like Zeus themed and stuff like that. I mean Zeus not even a good SM boss. All the things that made Zeus hard were the Zeus mechanics, like the bomb phase, like the source storms, the lightning phase, his like lunge explosion. So all the mechanics that made, or all the things that made Zeus difficult in that Fractured God Sphere were raid mechanics, not the Zeus boss fight itself. Not like when you take like even Crypto, if he touches you, he's gonna kill you. You've got was it Lasheen? No, I don't think Lasheen. She was an SM boss. There was Carol Ferris, where if you didn't get her counter, it was basically gonna wipe the group. You had Wonder Woman and her counters. You had Zatanna and the Lightning in Oa. I know I keep giving Oa examples, but it's just the one I thought of. But yeah, there's so many examples that you can have. It's just, why not? So I know this video's kind of run on a little bit longer, and you have the footage in the background here. But yeah, that's what it is. So in season 3, what they need to break down is to have proper. The one thing is we really need 8-man. So all these players flexing on SM and stuff like that have no idea what actually SM is like, because they're used to 4-man. The ad waves are complete jokes. The boss fights is just 1. So we need to have an 8-man. Even if it goes back to a 4-man in season 4, whatever. I mean, at least we need at least one 8-man just to show up the newer players what it was like, and just basically to have DC be able to, to flex what intricate mechanics are for boss fights are like. So we need an 8-man. We need difficult ad waves. Basically, just make it a carbon copy of what the original SMs were like, and then basically let players have fun. And I mean, and if it's not as profitable, whatever. I mean, you're still going to have the mark currency on the marketplace. So even if the players can't complete SM because it's too difficult, they're just going to buy the currency and buy the rewards. So I mean, it's still a win-win for the developers. But at least the players get something that's actually challenging. You can have different role setups. Like you're still going to need like 3 or 4 tanks if you need the higher rounds. But you can have difficulty. You can have different artifacts. You can have different artifact setups, different group setups. So that's why, for season 3, if it's not going to be an 8-man, then it's just going to be another, waste of a season. So take care, guys. We'll see you in the next video.